Hey guys, how you doing? It's been a few weeks since my last Vinyl Finds video, so I've accumulated quite a large stack of records to show. Most of these, I guess, are online purchases, some from Record Store. So I'll get started. Earlier this year, I showed the new album by this band, The Specials. This is the Specials singles collection, single disc singles collection. Their new album, Encore, which I did a review for, it's probably still in the top 5 albums of the year for me. This here is, as it says, singles. So I've got the Specials' first and second album on vinyl, but what I didn't have is some of the singles that aren't on any of their albums. Most prominently, the song Ghost Town, which is a big favorite of mine, is on here. The other really big songs that are on here that I didn't have, Friday Night, Saturday Morning. I think the song Why wasn't on any album. So there's a few really good Special songs on here that I didn't have. Also, after the second Specials album, they made an album called In the Studio, which was credited to the Special AKA, and there's 4 singles from that version of the group on here as well. Some of you guys might know the song Nelson Mandela or Racist Friend, which a couple of good songs from then. The vocalists had left the band by that point. A series of videos that I was watching and still am watching is everybody knows Dean over at Grandma's Handbag. He's doing his 100 albums of all time, and he showed this album, and I'm like, how do I not have this album on vinyl? And it's Husker Du, Zen Arcade, their second album. I don't know why it took me so long to get this album. This is a true double album. Back from the early 80s. Like I said, their second album, still quite punk at this point. This is another classic. I mean, it's a little bit harsh as compared to some of the later Husker Du albums, but probably their best album, I would say. And Dean does a much better job of describing, what this album sounds like than I'm doing right now. But it was convincing enough for me that I'm like, you know what, I've just got to finally get this album. And I had some gift card money, so finally I went for it. And of course, you can't just get one Husker Du album, so I got that, and then my brother-in-law picked this one up for me at a record store in Toronto. This is Husker Du's last studio album, Warehouse and Other Songs. By this point, the band was really sort of splitting apart, and I've heard Bob Mould once describe this album as 2 solo albums put together. So again, another true double album, much more melodic, sort of alt rock at this point. They were definitely more, I don't think commercial is the right word for Husker Du, but more accessible by this point. This was their second major label album on, what label were these guys on? Warner Brothers. All their previous albums, including Zen Arcade, I think they were on SST was the label, but whether Bob Mould describes this as 2 solo albums put together, so I guess one album being his, one album being Grant Hart's, but the songs are all mingled together and they all play on each other's songs, so this is still an amazing swan song for Husker Du. And then once I got those 2 studio albums, I started looking to see what kind of live Husker Du was out there, and I saw this Husker Du live in Minneapolis from August 1985. This is a bootleg. I was gonna buy this, and I was telling my brother-in-law that, I was looking at this, and he goes, "Oh, I got this Husker Du at home." And I said, "Is it the one with the black cover, the white writing with the guys on the front?" He's like, "Yeah." He goes, "That sounds like shit," and it does sound like shit, but it's Husker Du, and he didn't want it anymore. It sounds horrible. I'm glad he gave it to me because I wasn't gonna buy this off Amazon. I think it was going for like 20 bucks, 22 bucks. Good to have in the collection. It's from the period just after the Flip Your Wig album and before Candy Apple Grey. And there's actually 4, I think this was released, no, sorry, this is before Flip Your Wig was released. So August 85 is this live show. Flip Your Wig was released in September of 85. There's plenty of songs from Flip Your Wig on this and some older songs. And there was even 4 songs from the following year's album, 1986, Candy Apple Grey. So pretty interesting set list. I just wish it sounded better. There's a copy of this on YouTube that sounds way better than this pressing. I don't know if it's the pressing or what, but certainly the YouTube version sounded promising, but this just sounds muffled. It sounds like somebody was taping this from like another room or something like that. But you know, good to have as part of the collection, but I wouldn't pay 20 bucks for it. Then a favorite album of mine from the 90s, Soup Dragons, Love God. This was their breakthrough album. It has the well-known song I'm Free, cover of the Stones, in which Junior Reid does some toasting on it. I played this album so much back in the 90s, first on cassette and then on CD. I recently showed Hot Wired, which is the album after this, which has Divine Thing. But this is my favorite Soup Dragons album, very much in that baggy Manchester kind of sound, even though these guys were from Scotland. Then a slew of albums I bought from one of my favorite sellers off of Discogs, and these are all great albums that I wanted, and you know, none of these were a stretch to buy. They're all albums that I've been looking for, and to get it all from this one seller for such a great price and such quick shipping from Denmark. Frank Zappa, You Are What You Is, double album from, I guess it's the mid-80s, maybe 84 or so. This is very much in the same lineage as albums like Tinseltown Rebellion, maybe a little bit like Ship Arriving Too Late to Save a Drowning Witch. Those kind of albums from the 80s, Zappa, which is still a good Zappa. I mean, Steve Vai is on this on guitar. Ray White, Ike Willis, Tommy Mars. I mean, Zappa was always notorious for having such a great band, even though the lineups changed quite frequently. Then a couple of albums from Lou Reed. I've been looking for these for quite a while on vinyl. This is The Blue Mask from 82, I think it is. I've had this on CD for many years. Some great double guitar on this between Lou Reed and Robert Quine. Yeah, this is probably one of the last Lou Reeds that I really want to collect on vinyl. And then, so that was from 82, and then an album of Lou Reed's from 1978, Street Hassle. So those two are probably the last 2 Lou Reeds that I'm going to add to my collection. While I was familiar with Blue Mask, had that on CD, I've never had this. I think I had a download of this one time, but very unfamiliar with this. There's some great, I think it's cello playing, at least it sounds like a cello on this album that reminds me a lot of when John Cale was together with Reed in the Velvet Underground. So really, really happy to get this album from 78. The next album, Blues from John Lee Hooker, Mr. Lucky. I showed probably a few months ago a John Lee Hooker album called The Healer, which was an album he made in '89. I think this one came a few years later, but it follows much of the same template as that one, which is John Lee Hooker with a lot of guests. So Carlos Santana was on that album. Carlos Santana is on this album. Let me see the other guests that are on here. Albert Collins, Ry Cooder, Robert Cray, John Hammond, Johnny Winter. So there, Booker T. Jones. There's a lot of great guests on here. But make no mistake, this is a John Lee Hooker album. You don't get lost with all the guests on this, just like the Healer album. So always great to add. He had a bit of a renaissance in the later part of his career, starting with the Healer onward. Great to see John Lee Hooker. And then my favorite jazz artist of all time that I'm always looking to add any records that I don't have of his, Miles Davis. This is a live recording called Four and More. Recorded in concert, single disc album. Never owned this in any form before. The lineup on this is with Miles, Herbie Hancock, George Coleman on tenor sax, and then Ron Carter, Tony Williams on bass and drums. So you have most of the second great quintet of his. I guess all that you're missing on here is probably, I guess Wayne Shorter was part of that second great quintet. So I guess you have George Coleman, who I don't know who that is, on tenor sax in this case here. So What is on here, Seven Steps to Heaven, Walkin', just to name a few songs. Always willing to add. The cover's a little bit worn, but the vinyl sounds good, and I'll pick up Miles Davis records like this any day of the week. And then to end that 6-album pickup off of Discogs, Brian Eno, Taking Tiger Mountain by Strategy. The second solo album from Eno after Here Come the Warm Jets. Been looking to add this for a while. Been contemplating getting the reissue of this. And was really happy to find a really nice copy on Discogs. And I guess the only thing, where is it here? There's a little cut there, but otherwise the cover is in great shape. The vinyl plays amazing. Some amazing depth to sound on this, separation of all the instruments. It just great 70s sounding record with Brian Eno. Then the next slew of albums are some 90s classics, albums that were huge favorites of mine in the 90s that I owned on CD, and I finally got around to picking up reissues on vinyl. And I'm going to show these. They're 5 albums. I'm going to show them in sort of in the order of which I like them. So in 5th, but these are all great albums. So in 5th, just the least favorite of the 5, Supergrass, I Should Coco. This is the debut album by Supergrass. Huge players in the Britpop scene. No Longer Together. You guys might know the songs Caught by the Fuzz and All Right. There were some huge hits, and these guys were mainstays on the British summer festivals like Glastonbury and things like that. So Supergrass, I Should Coco at number 5. Number 4, another album that's been a long time coming that finally got reissued a few weeks ago. Doves and their debut album, Lost Souls. Doves, I believe, are from Manchester. They used to be part of an electronic band called Sub Sub. This, like I said, this is their debut album. The songs that you might know off of here: The Cedar Room, Sea Song, Rise. Again, when this album came out, got it on CD and played it tons, and been waiting for a reissue of this, and this reissue sounds amazing. I think of all the reissues that I'm going to show you from the 90s here, this is probably the best sounding of all those reissues at number 4. Then the record that's playing in the background, Travis, The Man Who. Another debut album. I mean, all these bands have such crazy, amazing debut albums. So many hits off of this. Writing to Reach You, Driftwood, Turn, just to name 3 huge hits. And again, these guys are from Scotland. In second place on those albums in the 90s, and this wasn't their debut album. I think this was their second album. The Breeders and Last Splash. The band, of course, started by the Deal sisters, Kim Deal being former bass player of the Pixies, and I guess she started this band after the Pixies broke up, I believe. and now she's back with the Breeders. The Pixies had reformed in the meantime. Kim Deal was part of that reunion, but then left the band. I guess wasn't interested in making some new material with them. But this is a 90s classic, alternative classic. I just love this. The Last Splash. Songs you'll definitely know Cannonball and Divine Hammer off of this. And number one in my little top 5 albums of the 90s that I picked up reissues for, REM, Out of Time. This is my favorite REM album. Recently I got a best of REM, which was from the Green Album onward. That album criminally ignores this album. It only has Losing My Religion on that comp. But this album is much more than Losing My Religion. The second single off of this was Shiny Happy People. I like that song. REM does not like that song. Consequently, they didn't include it on their comp. But this album is much more than just the singles. There was a third single, radio song that had KRS-One on doing some rapping parts. But the album tracks on this thing are just so solid. You have songs like Near Wild Heaven and Texarkana, which are sung by bass player Mike Mills. And then some amazing album tracks like Country Feedback, Half a World Away. This is such an amazing album, my favorite REM album. So while that's the number one album of the 5 albums that I showed from the 90s that I picked up reissues for, an album that beats all of those albums, which is not a recent pickup of mine, but I'm showing it for a reason, is this album, Teenage Fanclub Bandwagon-esque. This album beats all 5 of those for me, in my opinion. Teenage Fanclub at one point in time was my favorite band. Met them one time at a patio in Toronto when we went to see them live. This is an incredible album. This was their breakthrough album. This got them on Saturday Night Live and some of the late night talk shows. You might know the song The Concept and Star Sign from this album. They were the 2 biggest songs. And the reason why I'm showing this album, which is again one of my favorite albums of the 90s, and probably my top 30 of all time, is because I picked up this album here, which if you can see, there is some little money bag graphics here that is an ode to Bandwagon-esque, because this album is also Bandwagon-esque. It's a all covers album by Ben Gibbard of Death Cab for Cutie fame. Ben Gibbard, I guess, is as big a fan of Bandwagon-esque as I am. He decided to cover the entire album, beginning to end. I paid up quite a bit for this, not because I'm a big Ben Gibbard or Death Cab fan. I do like that band, but I got this because I'm a huge Bandwagon-esque fan. And the versions of the songs on here by Ben are excellent. Very faithful to the originals, even though they're in some places, instead of using a guitar, maybe Ben will use a keyboard. So it's a little bit less guitar oriented than Bandwagon-esque, the album proper. But I think Ben does an amazing job on this. If you're a Death Cab for Cutie fan and you don't know Bandwagon-esque, I think there's much here for you to love. The only problem that this album has is that when I'm listening to it, I've got the Teenage Fanclub album so ingrained in my brain that I feel like I want to take this record off the turntable and put on Bandwagon-esque. That's the only fault that I will, and I guess that's my fault for knowing the other album so well. But I'm not sorry to pick this up. I'm really happy to have this. But again, I think this is good for Death Cab for Cutie fans, Ben fans, Postal Service fans. And if you're a big fan of Bandwagon-esque, it wouldn't hurt to grab this. But right away, I had to pull the true Bandwagon-esque and play that. So anyway. there you go. 2 more albums. Leonard Cohen, Recent Songs. I got this for free after one of my records that I bought from a seller. I got a choice of a refund or a free album, and I picked this one, late 70s, Leonard Cohen. It's not bad, it's not great, but it's Leonard Cohen. Enough said. And the last album, a new release from this year, very highly anticipated on my part, Lee Scratch Perry and the album Rainford. I'm not sure if Rainford is a place where he was from or if it's part of his name, something along those lines. Lee Scratch Perry at this point is just sort of stream of consciousness lyrics over a reggae rhythm in most cases. He got some assistance on this from Adrian Sherwood, so there's some electronic elements on here, but make no doubt this is a reggae album. All the usual, lyric preaching, Rastafari, Jah, all that good stuff that I love. Great album from Lee Perry. This guy is 80 plus years old. I think he's 83. No 83-year-old should be making an album this great. Okay, great. That's a long video, guys. Thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you next time.